Captain Sarah Phoenix Martinez walked across the tarmac at Naval Air Station Oceana, her flight suit crisp despite the sweltering Virginia heat. The F-22 Raptor behind her gleamed in the afternoon sun, its sleek frame a testament to American air superiority. She had just completed another flawless training mission, her 10th consecutive perfect score in air-to-air combat scenarios. Admiral James Thornton watched from the tower windows, his jaw clenched tight. He had been monitoring Martinez's performance for months, and what he saw troubled him deeply. Not because she was failing, but because she was succeeding too well. Her unconventional tactics, her willingness to push boundaries, and her growing influence among the younger pilots were becoming what he considered a liability. Sarah climbed down from her aircraft, pulling off her helmet to reveal dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but her eyes held the sharp focus of someone who lived for the thrill of flight. She had earned her call sign, Phoenix, during her first deployment in Syria, where she had taken significant damage from enemy fire but managed to bring her damaged F-16 home safely, rising from what should have been certain destruction. "Martinez, my office now," came the voice over the intercom. Sarah looked up toward the tower, knowing that tone meant trouble. She handed her helmet to her crew chief, a seasoned sergeant who had worked on fighters longer than Sarah had been alive. "Good luck, Captain," he muttered, shaking his head. "Something's been brewing up there all week." The walk to Admiral Thornton's office felt longer than usual. Sarah passed other pilots heading out for afternoon sorties, their conversations falling silent as she approached. Word traveled fast on a base this size, and everyone knew when someone was being called to the carpet. Admiral Thornton's office was a shrine to naval aviation history. Model aircraft lined the shelves, and photos of carrier operations covered the walls. Behind his desk hung a painting of the USS Enterprise during World War II, its deck alive with aircraft and sailors. Thornton himself was a relic of an earlier era, a man who had flown F-14 Tomcats during the Cold War and believed in rigid chain of command above all else. "Sir, Captain Martinez reporting as ordered," Sarah said, snapping to attention. Thornton didn't look up from the file on his desk immediately. When he did, his pale blue eyes were cold as winter sky. "Martinez, I've been reviewing your performance reports. Your flying is exceptional, I'll give you that. But your attitude is becoming a problem." Sarah remained at attention, though confusion flickered across her face. "Sir, could you be more specific?" "Your refusal to follow standard engagement protocols during last week's exercise. Your unauthorized low-level pass over the civilian airport during the airshow rehearsal. Your constant questioning of established tactics in briefings." Thornton's voice grew sharper with each accusation. "You seem to think the rules don't apply to you." "Sir, with respect, those were tactical decisions made in the heat of simulated combat. The low-level pass was within acceptable parameters and—" "Enough!" Thornton slammed his hand on the desk. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't accept criticism, can't follow orders without adding your own interpretation. That might work in some squadrons, Martinez, but not under my command." Sarah felt her cheeks flush, but she kept her voice level. "Admiral, my record speaks for itself. I've completed every mission successfully, my safety record is spotless, and my fellow pilots—" "Your fellow pilots aren't the issue here. You are." Thornton stood and walked to the window overlooking the flight line. "I'm transferring you off this base effective immediately. You'll report to Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii. Maybe some time away from the spotlight will help you remember that being a good pilot means more than just flying well." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Hickam was essentially a dead-end assignment for fighter pilots, primarily focused on transport and support operations. It was where careers went to die quietly. "Sir, this seems excessive for minor protocol violations. I request the opportunity to—" "The decision is final, Captain. You have 48 hours to clear out your quarters and report to your new assignment." Thornton turned back to face her, his expression granite. And Martinez, I suggest you use this time to reflect on what it means to be part of a team. Sarah felt the injustice of the situation burning in her chest, but she knew better than to argue further. Yes, sir. Will that be all, sir? Dismissed. As Sarah left the office, her mind raced with the implications of this transfer. Her career trajectory had just been derailed by an admiral who seemed more interested in maintaining his version of order than recognizing exceptional talent. The other pilots would hear about this within hours, and speculation would run wild about what she had done to earn Thornton's wrath. That evening, Sarah sat in her quarters packing her belongings into standard military moving boxes. Her awards and commendations felt heavier than usual as she wrapped them in tissue paper. The Navy Achievement Medal for her work developing new air-to-air tactics, the Air Medal for combat operations in 3 different theaters, citations for excellence in training and leadership, all of it apparently meaningless to Admiral Thornton. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend and fellow pilot, Captain Mike Viper Rodriguez. Heard about Hawaii? This is bullshit, Phoenix. Everyone knows you're the best stick we have. Sarah typed back, orders are orders. Take care of yourself out there. But as she sealed the last box, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. This wouldn't be the end of her story. She would excel at Hickam, prove her worth again, and find a way back to frontline fighter operations. Admiral Thornton might have won this battle, but the war for her career was far from over. The next morning, Sarah completed her final flight at Oceana, a routine training sortie that felt anything but routine. As she taxied her F-22 back to the hangar for the last time, she allowed herself one final look at the base that had been her home for 2 years, the place where she had honed her skills to razor sharpness, where she had pushed the boundaries of what was possible in aerial combat. Her crew chief was waiting when she shut down the engines. Gonna miss having you around, Captain. That bird won't be the same without you. Take care of her for me, Chief. And remember what I taught you about the engine calibration tweaks. Yes, ma'am. Those modifications you figured out added at least 10% to our efficiency ratings. As Sarah walked away from her aircraft for the final time, she didn't see Admiral Thornton watching from his office window, his expression unreadable. She was focused on the future now, on the challenges waiting for her in Hawaii, and on proving that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to exceptional people is try to contain them. The flight to Hawaii would give her time to think, to plan, and to prepare for whatever came next. Sarah Phoenix Martinez had risen from destruction before, and she was ready to do it again. Hickam Air Force Base sprawled across the Hawaiian landscape like a military city, its runways stretching toward the Pacific Ocean. Sarah Martinez stood at the passenger terminal, her sea bag slung over one shoulder, watching C-130 transport planes lumber across the tarmac like mechanical whales. The tropical breeze carried the scent of jet fuel mixed with plumeria blossoms, a combination that somehow perfectly captured her new reality. Colonel Patricia Stryker Williams waited near the base operations building, her silver hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. She had commanded the 15th Airlift Wing for 3 years, turning what had once been considered a backwater assignment into a critical hub for Pacific operations. When she received Sarah's file and Admiral Thornton's terse explanation for the transfer, she suspected there was more to the story than protocol violations. "Captain Martinez, welcome to paradise," Williams said, extending her hand. "I'm Colonel Williams. I run things here, and I have a feeling your talents are being wasted on transport duty." Sarah shook the offered hand, surprised by the colonel's directness. "Ma'am, I'm ready to serve wherever the Navy needs me." "Walk with me," Williams said, leading Sarah away from the terminal. "Your file makes for interesting reading. Top 1% in flight school, combat decorations, and some very creative tactical innovations. Then suddenly you're shipped out here for minor infractions. Something doesn't add up." They paused near a group of buildings that looked different from the standard military architecture. The structures were low and nondescript, with no visible signage and tinted windows. Armed guards stood at discreet positions, and Sarah noticed sophisticated antenna arrays on the rooftops. "What exactly happens here, ma'am?" Sarah asked. Williams smiled slightly. "Joint Special Operations Training Facility. Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Air Force Pararescue, Marine Force Recon. The most elite units in the military come here to practice coordinated operations, and they need close air support for their exercises." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying we have a serious shortage of qualified fighter pilots for adversary training. Our current pilots are good, but they're transport specialists playing at being fighter jocks. The SEAL teams have been complaining that their training isn't realistic enough." Williams stopped walking and faced Sarah directly. "I need someone who can think like an enemy fighter pilot, someone creative enough to challenge our special operations teams in ways they haven't experienced. What about my F-22 qualification? I assume there aren't any Raptors assigned here." "You're right. But we do have access to F-16 Vipers for the training program, not as advanced as what you're used to, but in the right hands, they can be just as deadly." Williams gestured toward a secure hangar in the distance. "The question is, are you interested in pushing boundaries again, or are you content to fly cargo runs to Guam?" That afternoon, Sarah found herself in the secure briefing room of the Special Operations Facility, surrounded by some of the most dangerous men in the American military. Navy SEALs, their faces weathered by sun and combat, studied her with barely concealed skepticism. She was the new element in their carefully choreographed training environment, and they weren't sure what to make of her. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Hammer Thompson, a veteran of 6 deployments and countless classified operations, leaned back in his chair with arms crossed. "So you're the hotshot pilot who's gonna make our lives difficult?" "That's the plan, Chief," Sarah replied, matching his casual tone. "Colonel Williams tells me you've been finding the air opposition a little too predictable." "Last month's exercise was a joke," said Lieutenant Commander Jake Reaper Singh, the SEAL team leader. "We completed our objective with 15 minutes to spare because their pilots followed the same attack pattern 3 times in a row." Sarah studied the mission parameters on the briefing screen. "What if I told you I could cut that 15 minutes down to 0? Make you fight for every second of those exercises?" The room fell silent. These men weren't accustomed to being challenged, especially not by someone they hadn't worked with before. Chief Thompson leaned forward. "And how exactly would you do that?" "By thinking like someone who actually wants to kill you," Sarah said simply. "The pilots you've been training against are focused on following safety protocols and predetermined scenarios. They're not trying to win, they're trying to execute a training event. There's a difference." Over the next hour, Sarah laid out tactical approaches that made the Special Operations veterans sit up and take notice. She explained how enemy pilots in real combat situations would exploit the gaps in standard SEAL infiltration patterns, how they would use terrain and weather to maximum advantage, and how they would coordinate with ground forces to create multiple dilemmas simultaneously. Lieutenant Commander Singh found himself nodding despite his initial skepticism. "You're talking about asymmetric air-to-ground tactics. Most pilots think in terms of air-to-air combat. Most pilots haven't spent 2 years studying every Special Operations mission report from the last decade," Sarah replied. "I wanted to understand how air power could better support ground operations. Turns out, understanding how to support ground ops also teaches you how to defeat them." Chief Thompson uncrossed his arms for the first time since the meeting began. "When can you start?" The first training exercise took place 3 days later. Sarah climbed into an F-16 Viper that had been modified for the adversary program, its gray paint scheme designed to mimic potential enemy aircraft. The cockpit felt familiar, yet different from her F-22, older but still deadly in capable hands. "Phoenix, this is Control," came the voice over her radio. "SEAL Team 3 is beginning their insertion. You are cleared to engage when ready." Sarah checked her instruments and reviewed the terrain below. The SEALs were conducting a simulated raid on a terrorist compound nestled in a valley on the island's interior. Standard procedure called for the adversary aircraft to make predictable attack runs, allowing the ground team to practice their air defense procedures. Instead, Sarah climbed to high altitude and waited. She watched the SEALs' infrared signatures on her targeting display as they moved toward their objective. Most pilots would have announced their presence early, giving the ground team time to react and take cover. Sarah had a different plan. She waited until the SEALs were halfway to their target, committed to their route and vulnerable. Then she dropped to low altitude, using the terrain to mask her approach. By the time the ground team's air sentries detected her engine noise, she was already making her attack run. "Contact! Fast mover inbound from the northeast!" Chief Thompson's voice crackled over the radio. Sarah's simulated weapons release came 30 seconds earlier than any previous training exercise. The SEAL team found themselves caught in the open, forced to break their carefully planned approach and take hasty cover. Their mission timeline, meticulously calculated down to the minute, suddenly became meaningless. "Jesus," Lieutenant Commander Singh muttered as he pressed himself against a boulder. "Where the hell did she come from?" But Sarah wasn't finished. Instead of making a single pass and departing as previous adversary pilots had done, she circled back for a second attack from a different angle, then a third. She varied her approach routes, her altitude, and her timing, keeping the ground team pinned down and forcing them to adapt continuously. When the exercise finally ended, the SEALs had missed their objective timeline by 23 minutes. For men accustomed to precision and success, it was a sobering experience. Back in the briefing room, the atmosphere had changed completely. Chief Thompson looked at Sarah with something approaching respect. "That was the most realistic air threat we've faced in training. You fought like you actually wanted to win." "Because I did want to win," Sarah replied. "Every time you step into that cockpit, even in training, you should be trying to win. Otherwise, what's the point?" Lieutenant Commander Singh studied the mission replay on the screen. "Your attack timing was perfect. You waited until we were most vulnerable, then exploited every mistake we made." "And you made quite a few," Sarah said with a slight smile. "Your air sentries were focused on the most likely threat axis instead of maintaining 360 security. Your route planning assumed a conventional air threat pattern, and your contingency plans all relied on having more warning time than a real enemy would give you." Over the following weeks, Sarah continued to push the special operations teams harder than they had ever been pushed in training. She studied their tactics, learned their weaknesses, and developed counter-strategies that forced them to evolve. The SEALs began requesting her specifically for their most important exercises. What none of them knew was that Sarah's reputation was beginning to spread beyond Hickam. Stories of the Navy pilot who was revolutionizing special operations training reached other bases, other units. Requests began coming in from across the Pacific Theater for her to participate in major joint exercises. Sarah Phoenix Martinez had found her calling in the most unexpected place. She wasn't just flying again. She was teaching America's elite warriors how to be better at their deadly profession. And in doing so, she was becoming something far more valuable than Admiral Thornton could have ever imagined. 6 months after her arrival at Hickam, Sarah Martinez had become a legend among America's special operations community. Her call sign, Phoenix, now carried weight beyond her squadron, whispered with respect in briefing rooms from Coronado to Fort Bragg. She had pushed Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Marine Force recon teams to new levels of tactical excellence, forcing them to adapt and evolve in ways they never thought possible. The call came on a Tuesday morning as Sarah was reviewing flight plans for the week's training exercises. Colonel Williams' voice over the secure phone line carried an urgency that made Sarah straighten in her chair. Phoenix, I need you in my office immediately. We have a situation. When Sarah arrived, she found Colonel Williams standing with two men she didn't recognize. One wore the uniform of a Navy captain, his chest heavy with ribbons indicating extensive combat experience. The other was a civilian in an expensive suit, his bearing suggesting intelligence community connections. "Captain Martinez," Williams said. "Meet Captain David Sterling, commanding officer of SEAL Team 6, and Mr. James Crawford from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Gentlemen, this is the pilot I've been telling you about." Captain Sterling stepped forward, his handshake firm and his eyes intense. "Captain, your reputation precedes you. My men have been talking about your training methods for months. They say you think like the enemy better than the enemy does. Sir, I just try to make the training as realistic as possible." "Which is exactly why we need you," Crawford interjected. "We have a developing situation in the South China Sea. Intelligence indicates that Chinese military forces have established an unauthorized forward operating base on a disputed island. We need to gather intelligence and possibly conduct a surgical strike if diplomacy fails." Williams gestured to the classified briefing materials on her desk. "The mission requires our most experienced SEAL team working with our most innovative tactical air support. Based on the operational parameters, you're the pilot best suited for this assignment." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was what she had trained for her entire career, a real-world mission where her skills could make a difference. "What's the timeline, sir?" 72 hours, Sterling replied. "My team is already prepping, but we need to know if you're willing to volunteer for this operation. Your current assignment to Hickam technically excludes you from frontline combat operations." "But not," Crawford added, "if you're temporarily reassigned to a joint special operations unit. Your orders would come directly from Pacific Command, bypassing normal Navy personnel channels." Sarah understood the implications immediately. This was her chance to prove herself at the highest levels of military operations, to show that Admiral Thornton's assessment had been catastrophically wrong. But it was also dangerous, career-ending if things went badly. "I volunteer, sir." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of mission planning and preparation. Sarah found herself working alongside the most elite military unit in the American arsenal, men whose names would never appear in newspapers but whose actions shaped global events. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, whom she had come to know through months of training, served as the team's senior enlisted advisor. "Phoenix," he said during one of their planning sessions, "this isn't training anymore. These Chinese pilots aren't going to follow safety protocols or predetermined engagement rules. They'll be trying to kill you." "Good," Sarah replied, studying the satellite imagery of their target area. "I've been preparing for that my whole career." The mission briefing revealed the full scope of the challenge. The Chinese base was protected by advanced surface-to-air missile systems and patrolled by J-20 stealth fighters. SEAL Team 6 would infiltrate by sea, gather intelligence on the base's capabilities, and, if necessary, eliminate key personnel and equipment. Sarah would provide both insertion support and emergency extraction if the mission went wrong. But as the team reviewed the operational details, Sarah noticed something that troubled her. The standard extraction plan relied on the SEALs reaching a predetermined pickup point at a specific time. If they were delayed or compromised, the entire mission could collapse. "Sir," she said to Captain Sterling, "what if we modified the extraction protocol? Instead of a fixed pickup point, what if I could provide dynamic extraction support?" Sterling looked up from the mission timeline. "Explain." Sarah moved to the tactical display, highlighting various points on the island. "Standard procedure calls for the team to reach this beach landing zone at 0300 hours. But if you're discovered early, or if the mission takes longer than expected, you'll be trapped. What if I could pick you up from multiple potential sites, adapting to whatever situation develops?" The F-16 isn't designed for close proximity extraction support, one of Sterling's lieutenants pointed out. You'd be flying into a missile envelope with limited maneuverability. Not if I approach from unexpected vectors and use terrain masking the way I've been teaching and training. I can provide extraction support from positions where they won't expect a fighter aircraft to operate. Chief Thompson nodded slowly. She's done things in training that I didn't think were possible. If anyone can pull off dynamic extraction support, it's Phoenix. The mission launched at sunset on a Thursday evening. Sarah took off from Hickam in an F-16 configured for the special operation, its ordnance load carefully balanced between air-to-air capabilities and precision ground support. The SEAL team departed simultaneously from a submarine positioned 50 miles from the target island. As she flew toward the operational area, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Admiral Thornton had tried to end her career, but instead had redirected it towards something far more significant. The months at Hickam had taught her things she never would have learned in conventional fighter operations. "Phoenix, this is Neptune Base," came Captain Sterling's voice over the encrypted radio. "Team is approaching objective. All quiet so far." "Copy, Neptune. Phoenix is on station and ready to support." For the next 4 hours, Sarah orbited the target area at high altitude, monitoring radio traffic and watching for signs of Chinese air activity. The SEAL team's mission proceeded according to plan until 0240 hours, when everything went wrong. "Phoenix, Neptune Base, we are compromised. Say again, we are compromised." Sterling's voice carried the controlled urgency of a professional under fire. "Chinese patrol discovered our position. Request immediate extraction support." Sarah's training kicked in immediately. Instead of the planned extraction at the beach landing zone, the SEALs were pinned down in a rocky area 2 miles inland, surrounded by superior numbers and cut off from their primary escape route. "Neptune, Phoenix copies. I'm inbound for extraction support. Designate targets and prepare for dynamic pickup." What followed was the most challenging flying of Sarah's career. She brought her F-16 down to dangerously low altitude, using the island's mountainous terrain to avoid surface-to-air missiles, while engaging Chinese forces that were closing in on the SEAL team. Her precision strikes bought the team time to move, but their situation remained desperate. "Phoenix, we need pickup at coordinates Hotel 7 Alpha. It's not on any of our planned sites." Sarah checked her display. The coordinates indicated a narrow valley floor, barely wide enough for a helicopter landing, much less a fighter aircraft extraction. But she had an idea that combined everything she had learned about unconventional tactics. "Neptune, I can't land there, but I can provide something better. Prepare for rope extraction." Using a technique she had developed during training exercises, Sarah configured her aircraft for an extremely low-speed pass over the valley. As she approached the SEAL team's position, she deployed a specialized extraction system that allowed the team to attach to cables trailing from her aircraft. It was insanely dangerous, pushing both aircraft and personnel to their absolute limits. But it worked. One by one, the SEAL team members attached to the extraction cables as Sarah maintained precise altitude and speed over the valley floor. Chinese forces fired desperately at the aircraft, but Sarah's unconventional approach had caught them completely off guard. When the last SEAL was secured, Sarah climbed away from the island with 6 of America's most elite warriors hanging beneath her aircraft. The extraction flight back to the submarine rendezvous point took 28 minutes, every second of which tested her skills as a pilot. "Phoenix," Chief Thompson's voice came over the radio as they approached safety. "That was the most incredible piece of flying I've ever seen." The mission's success sent shockwaves through the military chain of command. Within days, Sarah found herself summoned to Pearl Harbor for debriefing with Pacific Fleet commanders. The same techniques she had developed for training special operations teams had proven decisive in actual combat. Admiral Patricia Hayes, the Pacific Fleet commander, reviewed Sarah's mission report with obvious admiration. "Captain Martinez, Your tactical innovations saved 6 lives and secured critical intelligence about Chinese military capabilities. I understand you were originally assigned to Hickam following disciplinary action? Yes, ma'am. Well, that was clearly Admiral Thornton's loss and our gain. Hayes closed the file and looked directly at Sarah. How would you feel about establishing a new training program for Joint Special Operations Air Support? You'd be working directly with Special Operations Commands across all service branches. Sarah felt the weight of vindication and opportunity settling on her shoulders. Ma'am, I would consider it an honor. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the briefing room at the new Joint Special Operations Air Training Center, addressing a class of elite pilots from all military branches. Her call sign, Phoenix, had become synonymous with tactical innovation and excellence under pressure. The irony was not lost on her. Admiral Thornton's attempt to bury her career had instead launched her toward heights she never could have reached through conventional channels. She had risen from the ashes of professional setback to become something more valuable than a regular fighter pilot, a tactical innovator whose methods were saving lives and winning battles. As she began her briefing to the assembled pilots, Sarah reflected on the lesson her journey had taught her. Sometimes the greatest opportunities come disguised as disasters, and sometimes the people who try to limit you end up setting you free to achieve things beyond their imagination. The Phoenix had indeed risen, stronger and more dangerous than ever before.